All right. So, you guys sent us a ton of stuff on Gaza and Lebanon.
Yeah.
And
It's a lot.
it really is. It's news articles, timelines, even briefing documents.
Yeah. The whole 9 yards.
It's obviously a very complex situation. Like, there's so much going on. But I guess if we had to kind of boil it down to one question, it seems to be, can these ceasefires actually hold?
Right.
Or is this, the calm before the storm?
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because we're not just looking at one ceasefire, right?
Yep.
We have two in both Gaza and Lebanon.
Right.
And they're both looking incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
Especially after this 14-month war between Israel and Hezbollah that, started back in October 2023.
Yeah, and it seems like the deadlines are constantly shifting. Like, first we hear Israeli troops are supposed to be out of southern Lebanon by January 26, 2025. But then the White House extends that to February 18th.
Right.
And then over in Gaza, we have this 42-day ceasefire, but then they say, oh, it could be extended. It's like, what is going on? Are they actually trying to work towards peace, or are they just buying time?
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that these extensions are good signs, right? It shows that there's at least some willingness to avoid a full-blown war.
Mm-hmm.
But they can also just be a tactic, right?
Sure.
Each side can kind of regroup, rearm,
Mm-hmm.
while appearing to be committed to peace.
Right, right.
There's a lot of wriggle room built into these agreements.
Yeah.
It relies on a certain level of flexibility and discretion from all sides involved.
Yeah.
Which, that can be exploited just as easily as it can be used for good.
Right, yeah. It's like they're all on this tightrope.
Yeah.
And they're trying to keep their balance.
Yeah.
But they're also having to watch everyone else's moves at the same time.
Exactly.
So speaking of precarious positions, Hezbollah, they kind of initiated this conflict in support of Hamas.
Yeah.
But they've suffered some pretty heavy losses, haven't they?
They have.
Not only did they lose their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, back in September of 2024.
Right.
But then their main arms supply route through Syria got blocked in December of that year.
Yeah. December 2024.
Yeah.
That was a huge blow to them.
Yeah.
Especially that supply line through Syria.
Yeah.
They'd become so reliant on it
Yeah.
that when it was cut off,
Yeah.
they were left scrambling, trying to find other ways to rearm.
Right. And I imagine without Nasrallah's leadership,
Yeah.
it's got to be difficult to maintain that same level of, unity and purpose.
Definitely it's not the same.
So is it ironic that they're distributing flyers with Nasrallah's picture and the slogan, "Victory has arrived"?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are they trying to convince themselves that they're winning this thing?
It's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
They're masters at manipulating public perception,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to project this image of strength, especially with the parliamentary elections coming up in Lebanon.
Right.
But at the end of the day, their actions speak louder than their slogans. I mean, they're furious that Israeli troops are still in southern Lebanon.
Right.
But they're also very wary of provoking another counterattack.
Yeah. So they're trapped between this desire to appear strong and then the reality of their weakened position.
Exactly.
That's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, especially for their Shiite Muslim base back home.
Yeah.
They're walking a tightrope,
Yeah.
trying to maintain the support of their base,
Right.
but also not alienating them by, doing something reckless.
Right. So Hezbollah is in a tough spot. Let's turn our attention to Hamas.
Okay.
They're still clinging to power in Gaza,
Yeah.
but it seems like they're playing a dangerous game by using the release of hostages as leverage in these negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that incredibly risky?
I mean, it's a high-stakes gamble for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, remember the case of Arbel Yehud,
Oh, yeah.
that female hostage?
Yeah.
The delayed release almost derailed the ceasefire entirely.
It did, yeah, and ultimately that deal involving her release and 2 other hostages is what paved the way for the agreement to allow displaced Palestinians to return to northern Gaza.
That's right.
So it really highlights how difficult of a position Hamas is in.
Yeah.
They need a permanent end to this war,
Yeah.
but they also need some bargaining chips to make sure that they get what they want.
Exactly.
It's like, how much can we push before the whole thing falls apart?
Yeah.
And then if we shift gears and look at Israel, it's clear that they're prioritizing the release of their hostages,
Oh, yeah.
which is understandable.
Yeah.
But they're also facing all these internal pressures,
yes.
especially from those far-right lawmakers in Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition government.
Oh, absolutely. And they are staunchly opposed
Yeah.
to any concessions to Hamas,
Yeah.
let alone, a permanent ceasefire.
So Netanyahu might want to end the war personally, but he's constrained by those partners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has to walk a fine line.
So ending the war with Hamas still in control could actually bring down Netanyahu's government.
That's a real possibility.
Wow. That's a lot riding on these negotiations.
It is.
And then we can't forget about the influence of President Trump, who played a key role in brokering those initial ceasefires.
Yeah, his private messages to Netanyahu were really instrumental in getting those in place.
Yeah. So what role is he going to play moving forward?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, will he continue to pressure Netanyahu to make concessions?
Mm-hmm.
Or will he just focus on, other issues?
Right. And while all this is happening, we can't forget about the people who are stuck in the middle of all of this.
Of course not.
Both in Lebanon and Gaza, there are displaced residents who are trying to go back home.
Yeah.
But they're being met with violence.
Right?
I was reading about Monabatzi, a resident of Bint Jabil in Lebanon, and she said, quote, "They think they're scaring us with their bullets.
Wow.
But we lived under the bombing, and bullets don't scare us."
That's powerful.
It is. It really shows the resilience of these people.
It does.
But it also highlights this impossible choice that they're facing.
Yes.
Do they stay in limbo?
Right.
Or do they risk their lives to return to what's left of their homes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It underscores the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah.
The disrupted lives.
Yeah.
The shattered dreams.
The families that have been torn apart.
Yeah. We need to keep that in mind as we try to understand all of this.
It's a reminder that this isn't just about politics and strategies.
Right.
It's about people's lives.
Absolutely.
So with all these competing interests and the fragile ceasefires, what does a successful outcome even look like? And how do we even get there?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's easy to get kind of lost in the, day-to-day headlines.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
I mean, both Gaza and Lebanon, they're like these microcosms
Right.
of this larger struggle in the Middle East.
Yeah. It's more than just land, though, isn't it?
It is.
It feels like it's this struggle for identity, for security, for survival almost. Exactly. These communities.
And that's what makes finding a solution so difficult.
Right.
I mean, when everyone feels like they're fighting for their very existence,
Yeah.
compromise just, it's not really an option.
It's not, yeah. And it brings us back to these ceasefires.
Right.
They're so fragile.
Yeah.
Like a house of cards, the slightest breed could knock it over.
Exactly.
So what are the key factors that are going to determine whether these actually hold this time?
Well, the release of all hostages held by Hamas is non-negotiable for Israel.
Right.
I mean, we saw how even a slight delay in Arbel Yehud's release almost caused everything to unravel.
It did. And Hamas needs something tangible to show its people.
Yes.
They need to demonstrate that this truce wasn't surrender, but a step toward achieving their goals.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they risk losing legitimacy.
Yeah, they could lose control.
So it's a high-stakes poker game.
It is.
And neither side can afford to blink.
No. And then you have Hezbollah's future role in Lebanon to consider.
Right.
They might be weakened.
Yeah.
But they're not out of the picture.
Not at all. They're still a major force in Lebanese politics. And they can mobilize their supporters on the ground very effectively.
So they can't be ignored.
No, and their relationship with Iran is a whole other layer of complexity.
Right.
If Iran decides to ramp up their support for Hezbollah, whether that's militarily or financially, that could completely change things.
So we have these internal pressures within each faction.
Yes.
But then we also have the influence of countries like the U.S. and Qatar.
Right.
I mean, the U.S. was really instrumental in brokering these ceasefires.
They were.
And a lot of people think their continued involvement is crucial.
Yeah, but they've got a lot on their plate globally.
So there's a chance that this might slip down their priority list?
It's definitely possible.
And that's where Qatar comes in.
Yeah, Qatar has been quietly working behind the scenes.
Trying to build bridges between Israel and Hamas.
So they're like the diplomatic glue.
In a way, yeah.
That's holding this very fragile piece together.
Yeah, but even the strongest glue can't fix a broken foundation.
Yeah.
The real challenge here is addressing the deep-seated issues that led to this conflict in the first place.
It's like we've been stuck in the cycle of violence for decades.
Yeah, it's a long and complicated history. But there are some glimmers of hope,
Oh, really?
There are ongoing discussions about a potential two-state solution.
Yeah, but that's been on the table for years.
It has.
What makes this time different?
Well, the changing demographics in the region are a factor.
Okay.
I mean, the younger generation on both sides seems pretty weary of the conflict, and they might be more open to compromise.
than previous generations.
Yeah.
So you're saying that a generational shift in attitudes
It could be a catalyst for change.
could change things. But it's not just about changing attitudes, though, is it?
Yeah.
It's about creating real economic opportunities,
Yeah.
addressing security concerns,
Absolutely.
and most importantly, building trust.
Yeah, that's huge.
Which is easier said than done.
Oh, it's definitely easier said than done.
Especially given the history of mistrust.
Absolutely. It's a monumental task.
But not impossible.
No, not impossible.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges.
Yeah.
But what are the most likely scenarios for the future?
For Gaza and Lebanon.
Yeah. And what should we be paying attention to?
Well, in the most optimistic scenario, the ceasefires hold, negotiations continue. And we actually start to see some real progress.
Towards a more sustainable peace.
Yeah, maybe even a framework for a two-state solution starts to emerge.
That would be amazing. And what about the less optimistic scenarios?
Well, on the other end of the spectrum, the ceasefires collapse, violence erupts again.
Right back where we started.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or we could see a sort of frozen conflict where the ceasefires technically hold. But there's no real movement towards peace.
So essentially a stalemate.
Yeah. And that can be just as dangerous as open conflict in the long run.
How so?
Well, it breeds resentment. It undermines trust.
Yeah.
And it makes finding solutions down the line that much harder.
So we have these potential pathways.
Yeah.
But what are the things that we should be watching for?
Like specific indicators of which direction things are heading in. Well, the hostage negotiations are key. If those break down, that's a very bad sign.
Okay.
Hezbollah's actions are also crucial.
Right.
Are they trying to provoke Israel? Are they receiving more support from Iran?
And what about the internal politics in Israel?
Yes.
Could Netanyahu's government actually collapse?
Potentially.
Yeah. If he pushes too hard for peace?
If he pushes too hard for a permanent peace with Hamas,
Yeah.
there's a chance that his government could collapse.
Okay.
And if a more hardline government takes power, that could have major implications for any hope of peace.
Right.
It's also crucial to keep an eye on any shifts in U.S. foreign policy. If they start to disengage from the region, that could create a vacuum.
That someone else could fill.
Exactly. Russia or China might try to step in.
So we're just in a constant state of wait and see.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's geopolitics for you.
Yeah.
It's always changing.
Well, thanks for helping us navigate that landscape today.
You're welcome.
I think we have a much clearer understanding of the situation now.
Good. I'm glad.
But I have to admit, it's still a bit overwhelming.
I understand. It's a lot to process.
It is.
But remember, even the experts don't have all the answers.
That's true.
The important thing is that we stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and consider different perspectives.
That's great advice. It's kind of crazy, right? Like, we've been talking this whole time about, these high-level negotiations and all this political maneuvering, and it's easy to forget about the people whose lives have been totally upended by this conflict.
It's so true.
We talked about those displaced residents earlier.
Yeah, right.
They're the ones who are really bearing the brunt of this.
Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at, maps and timelines and stuff, it's easy to forget about the human cost.
Right.
But then you hear their stories.
Yeah.
And it's just this powerful reminder of why finding peace is so important.
Right, because think about it. They've lost their homes, their jobs,
their families.
in many cases, their families.
Yeah.
And now they're facing this impossible choice.
Right.
Do they stay in limbo?
Yeah.
Or do they risk their lives to go back to what's left?
To what's left of their communities.
Yeah, and even if they do go back, what are they going back to?
Right.
These areas have been devastated by the fighting.
Yeah, it's going to take years to rebuild.
Years, if not decades.
Decades. And the psychological scars, those can last a lifetime.
It's heartbreaking. It makes you wonder, what can we do to help? It all just feels so big.
I know.
And so complex.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of sitting here talking about it.
Right. But a lot of people feel that way.
I bet.
They feel powerless
in
the face of something like this.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do.
Like what?
Well, first of all, just staying informed is huge.
Oh, okay.
The more we understand the situation, the better equipped we are to advocate for change.
So reading those articles you sent, listening to this deep dive.
Exactly.
That's actually a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Okay.
And once you have that knowledge, you can use it to raise awareness.
Okay.
Support humanitarian organizations. You can even contact your elected officials.
Oh, right. To express your concerns.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a good reminder that even small actions can make a difference.
They really can.
Whether it's donating to a relief effort or just having a conversation with someone who has a different perspective.
Yeah.
Every little bit helps.
Because at the end of the day, peace isn't just imposed from the top down.
Right.
It's built from the ground up. Dialogue, understanding, and a commitment to finding some common ground.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final takeaway you want to leave us with?
I would say don't underestimate the power of your own voice and actions.
Okay.
The situation in Gaza and Lebanon might seem far away, might seem overwhelming.
Yeah.
But every single one of us has a role to play in creating a more peaceful world.
That's a good point.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and never lose hope.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What do you think will happen next? What kind of future do you envision for Gaza and Lebanon?
Yeah.
It's complex.
It
There
is.
are no easy answers.
No.
But as we've learned, even in the midst of all this chaos, there's always room for hope, resilience, and the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better world.